And in thinking about it afterwards, and in other situations, three things strike me about how we were thinking about what had gone wrong. First of all, we thought, what has gone wrong? So that's immediately a taken for granted assumption that things could have gone right, as if it's not natural that things are going to periodically go not quite what we wanted them to be. But how then do we explain what's happened? Well, the first kind of explanation or feeling is, and the first justification for what had happened is things like, well, we couldn't have known that the markets would turn out to be less buoyant than we hoped they'd be. In other words, the explanation is ignorance. We were ignorant. And the response to being ignorant is to say, well, we better try to inform ourselves better this time so that this doesn't happen to us again. Note, we're assuming that it is possible for us to realize our global, overall, collective intention over long periods of time. We took that for granted. Competent people ought to be able to get together, and well-informed people ought to be able to get together and form an intention about what they're going to do for 5 years or so, and to formulate an intention of what outcome this is going to have. After all, we ought to be able to know where we're going and what we're doing if we're well-informed. So the response to this is to say, well, we'd better devote more time this time around to planning. We'd better devote more time to gathering information and analysing it so that we'll be better informed. The second kind of response to things not going well is to start having questions about competence. And normally, it's very difficult to make the judgment of yourself that you're incompetent. So you normally try to find somebody else who you think you can call incompetent and blame them. So here's an aspect of a way of thinking we've got, which leads us very rapidly to turn to find someone else we can blame for what's been happening to us. So this time around, we better be more competent. That is, we better pay much more attention to planning processes and procedures, which suits me very well, of course, as the corporate planning manager, because it makes me more important and more powerful. The board's going to spend more time on the long-term strategy. My department becomes more important and all that kind of thing. So I'm very happy with this situation. Except, of course, when it's suggested that I might be part of those who are incompetent and things And then the third kind of way, our way of thinking leads us to the third kind of reason for why things may not have gone very well, is that people, usually other people, are not very well behaved. So, for example, we'd set up this business in Venezuela, and somehow, I can't remember now what happened, but the person in charge of all the plant, all the equipment, managed to sell this equipment to someone else that actually belonged to our company, but they had illegally sold it to somebody else, but we couldn't get it back again or something like that. And also we were building a big dam, and whoever it was who was supposed to know what the ground conditions were like when we were making this tunnel hadn't found out enough or hadn't told us or something, so it was all going wrong, and we were losing millions and millions on that contract. We were losing money in Spain. So we're busy saying it's because people are badly behaved, other people. If only people would follow the procedures and the rules laid out in the plans and behave themselves, then we wouldn't be in this mess. So we'd better lay down tighter regulations, rules and procedures, set more objectives, in more detail that people are going to be measured against, and so on and so on. So all of this is then part of a particular way of thinking, and I'll try to say a little bit more in a bit about what kind of way of thinking this might be. So with that on our mind, we devote a great deal of attention now and spend hours, many more hours than ever before, discussing, analysing, putting together our new 5-year plan for the next 5 years. And this time we said things like, we'd better stop expanding overseas because the last time this just brought us nothing but grief. So what we'll do is we will retain the size of business we've got overseas, but we won't expand it. We've also been losing millions on all these building product companies, so we won't put any more money into them. We'll keep them as they are. So then what are we going to do when eventually we manage to correct the short-term situation and we've got more cash? What are we going to do with it? Well, one faction says we should do something really quite safe with it. We should buy a lot of land on which to build private houses. But my department and I and another faction were saying that the private housing market's not going to be very good. We've made forecasts. Interest rates are going to do this, that, and the other, going to come down or whatever, and the demand for housing is going to drop. We don't think that's a good idea. What we ought to do is diversify into areas related to construction, but a bit away from them, so that we can spread our risks and have a better, more balanced portfolio. Yeah, that kind of thing. I can't remember the other bits and pieces we did. And we made some more forecasts for over 5 years, and once again it shows life's going to be quite rosy, we're going to earn a lot of money and have a cash inflow, but this time we're more cautious. We don't make it that rosy, it just looks reasonably all right. And as you can see, it's all a kind of guess anyway. So then another 5 years pass, and by this time I'd left the company, but when I came to start writing about this stuff, I started making inquiries about what had happened. And interestingly, and this had become evident before I left, the company didn't do any of the things that it said it was going to do. In fact, it did, in almost every respect, exactly the opposite. So instead of retaining the overseas construction business, almost all the overseas construction companies were sold off. Instead of diversifying into other activities, there was no diversification, in fact the opposite, because the building products companies were sold off. So they're coming to concentrate more and more on construction in the United Kingdom. And instead of just retaining the size of the private house building company and not buying loads more land, all the money that had suddenly come pouring in unexpectedly was diverted into buying up housing land. They now own a very large bank of housing land. And what was the outcome? The outcome was completely unpredictable, staggering degree of success. Even more money was pouring in, and they were earning the highest return on capital probably in their history. Now that's the kind of question that got me thinking about a number of things, and had me very puzzled as I thought about it, especially because I was in this teaching situation where I was now I was teaching on an MBA, and Master of Business Administration, which was then a part-time degree, and people were coming in the evenings from their organizations, and I was telling them this stuff about how you plan by strategy is about fixing your long-term objectives and your aims and preparing your plans and your forecasts. Except I was pretty uneasy by this time, thinking, well, what's the point of all this? When our experience is that we prepare these plans, if we do them, they produce something that we didn't think they would. And frequently we find we don't do them anyway, and they still produce something we never expected. So why are we doing that? Then I remembered that we prepare the corporate plan once a year. And at first, when I got involved in doing this, the plan was a secret. So nobody was to know what the corporate plan was, which even then struck me as bizarre, because I thought, if nobody knows what it is, how the hell are they going to do it? There's no use 14 of us at the top of the holding company knowing what the strategy was, because we couldn't do it. Somebody else is going to have to do it. So eventually I managed to persuade people to circulate a summary, but they were so cautious about what would appear in it and what couldn't. But the interesting thing is what then used to happen to the planned documents, great big thick folder, which was a secret, and it could never be left on your desk. It had to be locked in the drawer.